This is 20 Minutes Live. Welcome to all of you from India and around the world. I am Ninad Karpe, partner at 100x.vc. Today, I'm truly, really delighted to have Dr. Naushad Forbes on 20 Minutes Live. Dr. Forbes is the co-chairman of Forbes Marshall, India's leading steam engineering and control instrumentation firm. He has long been an active member of CII and was the president of CII for 2016-17. He is chairman of Ananta Aspen Center, Bharatiya Yuva Shakti Trust, BYST, and Center for Technology Innovation and Economic Research, CTIER in Pune. Naushad was an occasional lecturer and consulting professor at Stanford University from 1987 to 2004, where he developed courses on technology in newly industrializing countries. He has received his bachelor's, master's, and PhD degrees from Stanford University. Wow. He has recently been presented the degree of Doctor Honoris Causa by the University of Edinburgh. Naushad is on the board of several educational institutions and public companies and was listed on the Indian Express list of 100 most influential Indians 2019. We are delighted. Thank you, Naushad, for coming on the show. It's amazing. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Our format is simple, unique, and crisp. Naushad will present his views on the topic prospects of the Indian economy post-COVID-19 for 10 minutes. After that, we'll have a round of Q&A for 10 minutes. If you have a question to ask Naushad, don't waste your time. Find the window on your computer for questions and shoot it to me. I will take them after the first 10 minutes of Naushad remarks. Over to you, Naushad, for 10 minutes. I'm looking forward to hearing you, Naushad.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ninad. Pleasure to be with you. I will try and address the question of the prospects of the Indian economy post-COVID. We're obviously going through an unprecedented time. It's an overused word, but it truly applies these days. And I'm going to make 5 points, really, as quickly as I can. First, that as we go through this health crisis, this unprecedented health crisis, this health crisis has also prompted an unprecedented response. Middle of April, about 60% of the world's population was under some form of lockdown or the other. Quite unimaginable if you think of it. In India, our own lockdown was amongst the most stringent in the world, and it's been extended, as you all know, 3 times. So over this last 2 months or so, there's been a very substantive shift that's taken place in how we see dealing with the virus. When the lockdown began at the end of March, defeating the virus was the mindset. Somewhere by the early part of May, the mindset seems to have shifted to living with the virus. And indeed, it looks like the virus is going to be with us for the next year and a half. It's going to be, so it's, I think, going to be, the first point is, it's going to be some time yet before we are post-COVID. We're going to be with COVID till then. The second point has been the impact that the lockdowns have had on the economy. And the impact on the economy has been huge in our country. We quibble over growth numbers from year to year. And when we quibble over those growth numbers, we're talking about 0.5%, 1%. Indeed, we talk about last year, a very substantial slowdown taking place in the economy, which means we went from 7% the 2 years before that to 4% last year. So a drop of about 3%. Compare that with what's happened in April and May. In April, I would estimate, sort of back of the envelope calculation, that the GDP dropped 40%, 40%. In May, a little better as some parts of the lockdown eased, but I would still think that the GDP was around 25% minimum, less than it was averaging last year. So a huge impact, probably an impact of, say, somewhere between 20 and 30% minus in Q1, which will probably go on in Q2 to being about minus 10% if everything goes well and we do not see a need to re-lockdown, and then continuing to remain somewhat sluggish through the rest of the year. Third point, so how will this year and next year turn out? And the last 3 points, the third is the short-term perspective, then the medium-term perspective, and then a longer-term perspective. So a short-term perspective this year. You know, when you ask people how things will turn out, and especially if you ask someone who is used to behaving, I'm not an economist, but behaving like one, the usual answer is it depends. And the it depends in this case for the short run is it depends on the government. It depends on, in particular, the policy package. So far, we've seen very limited enterprise support from the government for enterprises at large. What enterprise support there has been as part of the government's economic recovery package has been focused on MSMEs. That's very good. It needs to include MSMEs, but there's a need for a wider economic package for the support of all enterprises, whether it's a small shop, it's an MSME, it's a large manufacturing company, it's a shopping mall, it's an airline, it's a construction company. They all need minimum support to cope at least with the duration of the lockdown. That's not so far been forthcoming. So on the basis of what has been done so far, I think at best we can look at GDP growth this year of around minus 10%. If there's a substantive enterprise package that happens that particularly sustains some employment, we could possibly do a little better, but little better means maybe we'll end up with minus 5% instead. In the medium run, next point is things could look better. We could bounce back. But whether or not we do bounce back, I think will depend on two things. It will depend on a key reversal taking place in one really troubling thing that's happened as a result of the lockdowns, which is the entire issue around migrant labor. Now, there's a huge humanitarian issue there. I don't want to talk about that. Much has been made of it with great justification. But there's a huge economic issue also. One of the key drivers of economic growth in any country at any point in time is the move of people from lower productivity occupations to higher productivity occupations. That's what migration has involved. People have moved from rural areas where they were suboptimally employed, where they were employed in very low occupations, low value-added occupations. They've moved to cities, are earning a lot more, and by definition, they are therefore contributing to the economy much more. When they move back to rural areas, you're going to unwind all of that economic gain that has taken place. So whether or not we see a bounce back next year will depend on us getting back the migrant labor to be productively employed in urban areas again. The second thing that it will depend on is a bounce back in consumer confidence, which will fuel demand. That's more obvious, and we can talk about it more in the Q&A. The last point is, what are the prospects in the long term? In the long term, well, I believe that the India story is just as robust and just as strong. We've been one of the world's 10 best performing economies in the last 30 years. We have every prospect and potential of being one of the world's 10 best performing economies in the next 30 years. There's a big proviso though. There's also, by the way, an additional opportunity that's coming our way, because as people around the world have been nervous at the proportion of product that they source from China, they're looking to diversify their supply chains and see how they can source more from other parts of the world, including from us in India. So a big opportunity. But there's a big but. The big but is, I think we've seen in the lockdowns a resurgence of controls in the economy and a resurgence of very troubling rhetoric in the economy that harks back to the 1970s. I think our bureaucrats have tasted real power again for the first time in 30 years. And I'm nervous about their willingness and ability to give it all back. And the important thing is that they have to give it all back, not just some of it back, all back. Because if they continue with the controls, we have no chance of really achieving our true potential. The second thing is this resurgence of troubling rhetoric. The Prime Minister is right to talk about self-reliance in essential medical supplies like PPEs and masks. That's what you need in a health crisis. But if we start talking about self-reliance more generally, and we start imposing more and more protection for the Indian economy, I think, again, that's going to take us back to a competitive situation of the kind that we had in the 70s, and that will, I think, doom our prospects. So I think as long as we can keep away from these two great dangers of controls and the wrong rhetoric around things like self-reliance, I think our prospects will continue to be very buoyant in the long run. Thanks.
Thanks, Naushad. I mean, that was pretty amazing. In a short span of 10 minutes, you have given a very, very crisp overview of the economy. We are already flooded with questions, so I'm going to quickly start shooting questions at you. Mudit Jain is asking, overseas governments have given a lot of money in the pockets of business people and poor people. Why is India not doing
it? So why is it not doing this is a good question. You know, what we recommended from CAI about, early April, 2 months ago now, was a widespread enterprise support package where we said, provide loans at an interest rate of 4 to 5% to all enterprises for 3 months' salaries. Yeah? So we're not saying subsidize employment. We're saying provide it as loans that enterprises would pay interest for, but at 4 to 5%, loans guaranteed by the government. So you remove the need for banks to charge a risk premium. And this would have sustained a very wide employment for these 3 months. And it would have ensured actually a much smoother bounce back. Why has it not happened? I don't know. Each time we discuss it with people in the government, they say it's a very good scheme. It makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't happen. What finally came out was the MSME package, which is somewhat related to what we've been recommending. The other thing that's missing so far is anything for the stress sectors. So, for example, take shopping malls, take the travel and tourism industry, etc., that have been really hard hit. There's been nothing so far. I think something will be forthcoming, but I worry that it's taking so long because the longer it takes for any package to come through, the less impact it's going to have.
Okay.
So why is it not happening? It's a good question.
Let's hope it happens. Let's end on that positive. Yeah. Hitesh Gajare is asking, labor, you alluded to the migration of labor back. And so when they come back or whatever time they come back, will labor costs go up? Do you expect them to come back? And will labor costs go up as an input cost for industry?
So will they come back? I think they will. Because remember what brought them here in the first place. What brought them here in the first place was, they weren't attracted by the charms of coming to cities and living in slums. They had no choice. They were largely unable to make a living in rural areas. And so they came to cities because their prospects were better in cities, right? So I think they'll come back because after a period of time, as the fear goes away and so on, I think people will come back because the economic conditions at home are not going to have changed so substantively, right? Question is, will labor costs go up? Let me give you the answer that I would give. I hope they will. I hope that labor costs will go up because I think we should be paying them more when they come back so that they can actually afford decent housing and they can afford the kind of social surcharges that would pay for some health insurance, that would pay for some minimum, maybe even employment insurance. So will labor costs go up? I hope so.
So Nishant Kolgaonkar is asking, there has been a lot of discussion on the recovery. Will it be V shape, U shape, W shape? Would you like to put an alphabet to the recovery, your own,
So
or?
I think the best shape that I've heard that reflects, I think, what I'm seeing is a Nike recovery, a swoosh shaped recovery, meaning a very substantive and rapid fall, and then a much longer term recovery over time. Yeah. So, and the reason is that not even with all the right interventions by the government, you would have that kind of a recovery, because there are parts of the economy that we will still be limited in opening up. We're not going to go back to, packed restaurants and bars and packed sports venues and packed movie theaters anytime soon.
Sure. So Jagdish Malkani is a little bit, kind of, you already
Hi,
alluded to
Jack.
this, but he's saying why are we going back to this self-reliant, kind of phenomena? Have we not learned lessons from post 1993?
I I I completely sympathize, Jaggi, and I wish I don't think we recognize how damaging the old rhetoric was. Um, what one of the things that I've been doing in the lockdown is rereading old Lakshman, you said it, collections of cartoons. And the scary part of rereading Lakshman is that many of his cartoons, which were so perceptive and such a useful commentary on current affairs in the 1970s, are again a perceptive comment on current affairs today. And that should make us worry, because some of these things around, he has this wonderful cartoon about this minister visiting, I think it was All India Radio, and he's shown this new radio that's been developed entirely in the country. And he says, it's really good to see this, homemade radio. And next time he says, we must be completely self-reliant, and even the beep beep should be in Hindi.
So there is this person hasn't put his name. He or she is asking a little controversial topic about state governments diluting, the word uses diluting labor laws. What will be its effect on labor? So can you respond quickly?
So, yeah, so if you look at, UP, MP, Gujarat have all initiated significant dilution of existing labor laws. I think are they initiating the right kind of thing? Yes. Are they initiating the right thing? I don't think so. I think this is sort of a knee-jerk reaction. Let's do something about labor laws at this point in time. But what they're doing is, I think, less thought through than it needs to be. See, today we have a situation where 85% of our labor is informally employed, and we have complete flexibility and no protection, basically, for that 85%. And somewhere like 15% is formally employed by enterprises, where you have almost complete protection and no flexibility. And so you need a balance, and we need to start working. It's a big challenge and a big problem, but we need to start engaging and finding a way where you get the balance of protection and flexibility right for all forms of labor. So the formal stuff needs to be less protected and more flexible, and the informal stuff needs to be more protected and less flexible. But we need to meet in the middle
A
somewhere.
balance. Okay, hopefully we can find a balance. Rajiv is a NRI. He's asking a very simple question. How can the Indian government increase the confidence of global companies to increase India's share in the global supply chain? What can the government do, you think?
I think the best way is if Indian companies are themselves active overseas, because if Indian companies have the confidence to export around the world and be competitive around the world and be secure that we can compete with the best anywhere, using India as our manufacturing base, then so will foreigners. So I think, expecting foreigners to invest in India as a manufacturing base when Indian entrepreneurs have not invested in India as a manufacturing base to trade around the world is, I think, a mistake. I think we should first see a much more outward-looking, confident, export-oriented Indian industry, and then expect to see the world looking at India as a base for manufacturing to happen for the world.
So, Naushad, there are a lot of comments on migrant labor, and rightfully so. I think it pains everyone. But Subha Bangera is saying he's probably making a comment and not a question to you. He's saying a lot of these workers are skilled workers, they acquired skills in the cities. Aren't they likely to set up something in their villages or towns close by? Why would they return?
Well, we might have this view that rural life is somehow attractive, but cities are enterprising, exciting places. They are very high productivity places. There's a wonderful book called Triumph of the City by an economist named Ed Glazer. I recommend it very highly. He has a whole chapter on, by the way, Mumbai. And it's worth reading because he makes the argument that cities are actually an economy's growth dynamo because the collection of people makes them productive. And the fact that you're together with, in very close proximity with other people who are being highly productive makes your own productivity still higher. And I think we should expect that today 70% of our population lives in rural areas. We're quite a unique country in having such a high proportion after so many decades. We should expect cities to actually grow. We should expect 100 cities in the country to have a population of over 1 million in the years ahead. And we should expect, actually, we should figure out how we can make cities attractive, pleasant places to live, and not try to keep people from moving to them.
So I'll just take last one or two questions. Mudit Jain again has, he's very passionate about this topic. He says India should have followed the model of Japan, which is BTMITI. They have that whole model.
Yeah.
Why is India not following it? You think that's relevant? It's outdated. What are your quick views? Because I want to take one more quick question.
So the MITI model was very effective for Japan, but it's a very state capacity intensive model. It's a model that requires the state to pick winners and then back those winners. Maybe it worked in Japan for a few years in the 50s and 60s, probably not after that, but for the 50s and 60s. I don't think it would ever have worked in our country. We're too argumentative, we're too diverse. For us as a country, the right role of the government is to get out of the way.
Okay, right role of the government is to get out of the way. Yeah. So we have
Which is what we did in 1991, and look at the results.
Correct. Get out of the way. Great. There's a young viewer, and he's saying, I'm a young guy. He hasn't put his age, it's fine. Anything positive you want to say? So let's end your last question on some positive note, and then I might ask you.
Well, I want to come back to the overall potential of India. I mean, I think we have a fabulous long-run potential. I said we were one of the world's 10 best performing economies in the last 30 years. Every projection says that we will be one of the world's 10 best performing economies in the next 30 years too, right? We have a young population, which is growing. We have really aspirational consumers. They all want a better life. We have some really keen entrepreneurs. I mean, Ninad, you were telling me about how you're funding so many of them, and I think that's fabulous. Yeah. Sure. And we have a society that just wants to better itself, and it's willing to make sacrifices to, give their children a better education, sacrifices to uproot themselves and move, halfway across the country for a better life. I mean, and send money back. We have everything that it takes to be not just one of the world's 10 best performing economies, but to be the world's best performing economy in the next 30 years. But we shouldn't mess it up, right? We shouldn't think of controls and planning as the way to do that. We should rely on the enterprise of the Indian people, and a very limited role for the state.
Great. That's ending on a positive note. We have all that it takes to be the world's best. I can't let you go, Naushad, without asking just one or two quick personal questions. This is a chance to ask you on a
Sure.
public platform. So last 2 months you have been in lockdown. Is there any book which you have read? I know you read a lot. Is there any book which you have read which you would like to recommend to our viewers? Any specific book?
So two books. So the first thing that I read when the lockdown came in, I, like everyone else at the end of March, was sort of like, what the heck is going on, right? You wake up in the middle of the night, you're worried, you're fearful, everything else. So when I'm in that kind of mood, I reread one book. I reread a book by P.G. Wodehouse called Leave It to Smith, and that's what I did. It's
Okay.
one of the great books of all time. I can't recommend it enough. I must have read it for about the 15th time at the end of March.
Wow.
Yeah. And the second book that I recommend is actually Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo's new book called Good Economics for Hard Times. It's an extremely good book on many of the current issues in our times.
So there you are, two books recommended. And then finally, when can we expect a book from Dr. Naushad Forbes?
So good timing, Ninad, because, I started trying to write a book 2 years ago, and then nothing happened. And I figured that if I didn't use the lockdown to make some progress on it, that would be a real waste. So I'm now on chapter 3, and my hope is to get halfway through the book before the lockdown ends. So far, the lockdown has been very obliging and has been extended a few times. I don't know who's going to get there first, the lockdown being lifted or me getting to at least the halfway mark in the book.
Irrespective of that, Naushad, we will look forward to your book. Whatever happens, whenever it comes, we look forward to. Thank you, Naushad, for coming on this platform today. We're delighted you could spend this time and share your thoughts. Your 10 minutes crisp comments were amazing. In that 10 minutes, we got a really good overview. Thank you for coming. And viewers, remember, every Thursday, 20 minutes live at 5 p.m. Thank you, Naushad, for joining us today.
Thank you, Nina. Thanks. And thanks for all the great questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.